Welcome back, everyone, to the Deep Dive. Ready to explore some more thought-provoking ideas?
Always.
Today we're diving into Connie Riker's Dominant Women, Rise of the Female Supremacy in a Changing World.
Oh, this one's going to be interesting.
It really is, especially considering, well, our listeners' interests in the married red pill community and all. This deep dive might hit a few nerves, but honestly, I think it could offer some seriously eye-opening perspectives.
You're telling me, what's fascinating to me about Riker's book is she doesn't just stop at advocating for equality, she takes it a step further.
Yeah, I noticed that too.
She argues for a complete power shift, a future where women run the show, basically.
Dominant Women. The title's not subtle.
Nope. And that obviously has huge implications for, the stuff our listeners are always thinking about, men's roles, relationships, all that.
For sure. And she doesn't shy away from anything controversial either. Hypergamy, which we talk about a lot in the red pill world, male disposability, it's intense.
It's a lot to digest.
But I think it's crucial if we want to actually grasp what's happening with gender dynamics today. You can't just ignore the tough stuff.
Absolutely. One of Riker's core arguments is that society has always undervalued women, right? Like pushing them into these roles that just stifle their true potential.
Okay, so it's not just a lack of opportunities, but more like this deliberate effort to keep women down.
Exactly. It's about keeping them subservient, less powerful than men.
Gotcha. So how does she back that up? Any historical examples?
Oh, tons. Riker points to stuff like, women being denied the vote, the right to own property. It's all about controlling their power, their independence. Even the word hysteria.
Hysteria?
She goes into how that was used to basically dismiss women's emotions, make them seem crazy. It's a wild reminder of how messed up things have been.
Yeah, it makes you wonder how much of what we consider normal is actually built on this foundation of inequality.
It's everywhere. And Riker doesn't stop at history either. She connects these patterns to the present, saying a lot of the same crap is still happening today.
Like with hypergamy, right? Women marrying up. She talks about that.
Oh, definitely. Riker argues that hypergamy, it's not just some natural instinct, it's social conditioning.
Right.
Women are basically taught to look for partners who can boost their social standing, their finances. You can see how that plays into the whole married red pill philosophy.
Big time. It makes you wonder, is hypergamy really how women are wired? Or is it just, generations of programming?
Right. It's a tough one.
Especially for guys trying to build strong marriages, like what are you supposed to do with that information?
And Riker takes it a step further. She connects hypergamy to the idea of male disposability.
Whoa, okay. How does that work?
Well, she's saying this pressure on women to marry up, it reinforces the idea that a man's only as good as what he can provide, how well he protects. So in situations where those things are vital.
Men become expendable.
Sadly, yeah.
Yeah.
And she links this to how masculinity itself is demonized now, like strength, stoicism, competitiveness, all those classic manly traits.
They're seen as bad now.
Basically. So men are in this impossible situation. They're supposed to be providers, protectors, but then get criticized for embodying the very qualities that make them that.
Talk about a catch-22, damned if you do, damned if you don't. I can see why so many men feel lost, with all these shifting gender roles.
Riker addresses that confusion head on. She says men need to redefine masculinity on their own terms. Find ways to be fulfilled that work with women's increasing dominance, not against it.
So it's not about men just giving up and letting women take over completely?
Not exactly. Riker's vision is more about collaboration, but with women at the helm, it's a totally different way of looking at power.
A huge shift.
Definitely. And she thinks this shift will ultimately be good for everyone, not just women. It's about everyone reaching their full potential.
Okay, I know all this might sound pretty extreme, especially to those coming from a red pill perspective, but Riker's book is meant to start a conversation. It's about questioning everything we think we know about gender.
It's meant to make you uncomfortable?
Exactly. Even if you don't buy everything she says, there's value in understanding her point of view, especially for those of us trying to figure out relationships, marriage, all that in this crazy modern world.
Couldn't agree more. There's a lot to unpack here.
Tons. So we talk about her overall argument, but I want to get into some specific examples. Like, what about the workplace? How does she see women's dominance playing out there?
Oh, she goes right for the wage gap. Says it's not a myth, but proof of a system that undervalues women's work.
But what about all the research saying the wage gap is more complicated than that?
She addresses that, but maintains that even after accounting for different career choices, hours worked, there's still a big difference in what men and women earn.
So it's not just about individual decisions, it's the system itself.
Yep. And she doesn't just point fingers, she offers solutions. Women need to be bolder in negotiating salaries, demanding promotions, and supporting each other to break through those glass ceilings.
Makes sense. But what about the argument that women are just choosing different career paths, ones that happen to pay less?
Riker acknowledges that, but she also says those choices are often influenced by societal expectations, gender stereotypes that push women towards certain fields like nursing or teaching, which are traditionally undervalued.
So those individual choices aren't really free choices. They're shaped by a system that limits women's options from the get-go.
Exactly. And that's a recurring theme in her book. Always looking beyond the surface, examining the power dynamics at play.
That's a point that'll resonate with our listeners, I think.
Yeah.
It's easy to get lost in the individual stuff and miss the bigger picture. But to truly understand relationships, you got to be aware of both the personal and the political.
100%. And that's one of the things I appreciate about Riker's book. It gives us a framework for understanding gender dynamics that goes way beyond just individual interactions.
She digs deep, right into the root of it all. So we talked about the workplace, but she also gets into religion, right?
Oh yeah, things get really interesting there. Riker acknowledges that religion has historically upheld patriarchal structures, but she also sees potential for change, like reinterpreting religious texts to support female leadership.
So it's not religion itself that's anti-woman, but how it's been used.
Exactly. And she uses examples like the ordination of women in some Christian denominations, showing how religious institutions can adapt to a more, even female-centric leadership style.
They're going to be controversial in some circles.
Totally. But it's something to think about, especially as more and more women are pushing back against traditional roles within their faith.
For sure. Sounds like she's challenging us to really examine how religious beliefs can either reinforce or challenge these old gender roles.
100%. That critical thinking is crucial, not just with religion, but everything. Riker wants us to question our own beliefs, to actively work towards a more just world for all genders.
Well, I think this is a good spot to take a break. We've covered a lot in this first part of our deep dive into Connie Riker's Dominant Women. It's a book packed with challenging ideas that are bound to get people talking.
For sure, and I'm looking forward to getting even deeper into Riker's ideas in the next part. We'll be exploring her perspective on eco-feminism and what she sees as the future of female supremacy. Picking up where we left off, one of the things that struck me about Riker's book is how she connects these seemingly totally different ideas, like female supremacy and the environmental movement.
Now, that's a curveball. How does she make that link? At first glance, it doesn't seem to fit.
It might seem like a stretch, but actually her argument is pretty clever. She says that the same kind of patriarchal mindset that tries to dominate women, it also messes up our relationship with nature. It's all about exploitation and control.
So she's drawing a parallel between how we treat the planet and how we treat women, both victims of this dominant force.
Exactly. Both stemming from this worldview that prioritizes control over harmony. And then she introduces this concept of eco-feminism.
Eco-feminism. Never heard of that.
It basically explores how women's oppression and environmental destruction, they're interconnected. Two sides of the same coin.
Wow, that's heavy. Makes you think about how those attitudes towards women, those power dynamics, they might actually be reflected in, like, our environmental policies. If we disrespect women, do we also disrespect the earth?
It's a thought-provoking idea, right? And Riker goes on to highlight all these examples of women leading the charge in environmental activism, showing a link between feminine values, nurturing sustainability, with a healthier relationship with nature.
Okay, I see where she's going with this. Women as protectors, caretakers, not just of children, but of the planet too. Kind of makes sense.
And she suggests that this shift towards female supremacy, it could actually lead to a more sustainable approach to, well, everything. How we treat the planet, how we manage resources.
Interesting. Okay, but let's switch gears for a sec and circle back to something you mentioned earlier, this whole concept of male disposability. It's a big one in the Red Pill community. I know a lot of our listeners will be tuning in for this. How does Riker handle this within her whole female supremacy framework?
Well, she digs into the structures that make men seem expendable,
Yeah.
And she argues it goes way beyond just physical danger, like in war or dangerous jobs.
Right, because we're not just talking about soldiers here.
It also shows up in the emotional realm, where men are expected to bottle up their feelings, prioritize everyone else's needs above their own.
Leading to isolation. That feeling of carrying the weight of the world.
Exactly. And she connects this back to hypergamy, saying that pressure on women to marry up, it further reinforces the idea that a man's worth comes from his ability to provide and protect. So guys are constantly trying to prove themselves, which can lead to burnout and feeling used. Like once they're no longer useful, they get tossed aside.
Damn. It's a bleak picture, but I think a lot of men can relate to that feeling, especially with all the complexities of marriage today.
Absolutely. And Riker's point is we need to think critically about the forces creating this dynamic. She wants men to find their worth outside of those traditional measures of success, and to put their own well-being first, both physically and emotionally.
It's a powerful message for men, especially with all the mixed messages out there about masculinity. What does it even mean to be a good man these days? It's like the rules are constantly changing.
Right. It's all very confusing. And it ties into her vision of a future where both men and women can thrive, but in a more balanced way.
Okay, I get that. But I know some people will be uncomfortable with this whole female supremacy thing. They might see it as a threat.
Riker understands that. And look, even if you don't agree with everything she proposes, I think there's value in engaging with her ideas. It helps us understand the forces at play in our relationships, allows us to navigate these changes with more awareness.
Makes sense. Okay, so we've talked about eco-feminism, male disposability, but what about sexual liberation? How does that fit into all of this?
Riker talks a lot about that, and for her, it's all about female agency and empowerment. Women taking control of their bodies, their sexuality, their reproductive choices, free from all those societal pressures and double standards.
That's a powerful concept. But how does she square that with the idea of hypergamy, where women are driven to find those high-status partners?
She acknowledges that apparent contradiction. But she says true sexual liberation lets women make choices based on genuine desire, not just societal expectations.
So it's about choosing a partner because you truly want them, not because they fit some predetermined mold.
Exactly. And she believes that as women gain more power and independence, they'll be less likely to choose partners based solely on their status or income.
Interesting. So she's envisioning a future where women are free to choose based on real compatibility, shared values, not out of some obligation to secure a provider.
Right, and she believes this will ultimately lead to more fulfilling relationships for both men and women.
Now, I know this idea of female sexual liberation can be a touchy subject. Some people might argue it leads to a breakdown of traditional values, hurts marriage and family.
Riker addresses those concerns head-on. She argues that traditional notions of female sexuality have often been used to control and restrict women. And she says true liberation means dismantling those outdated norms and embracing a more expansive view of female sexuality.
It's a bold stance, one that's sure to spark debate. But I think it's important to have these conversations, especially as we try to understand how gender roles and relationships are evolving.
I agree. Riker's book provides a framework for thinking about these issues, encouraging us to be more critical and nuanced in our approach to these conversations.
It's definitely relevant to our listeners who are already deeply engaged in understanding these dynamics. Okay, so we've talked a lot about women, but what about the guys? What does Riker say about men's role in a female-led society?
Oh, she doesn't ignore that. She spends a lot of time exploring how men can adapt and thrive in a world where women are in charge. And this is where I think her message is particularly relevant for men struggling with all these changes.
So she doesn't advocate for men to be pushed aside or emasculated?
Not at all. Instead, she challenges men to redefine what masculinity means, to embrace qualities that have traditionally been seen as feminine, but are actually vital for healthy relationships and a balanced society.
So it's about men evolving and adapting, not clinging to the old ways.
Exactly. Riker argues that men can find fulfillment in roles that complement women's leadership, not compete with it. She wants them to embrace their emotional intelligence, be more collaborative and nurturing, find value in supporting and empowering women.
It's a pretty big shift from the traditional view of masculinity. But how does she address the anxieties men might have about losing power in this new dynamic?
Riker gets that this transition can be tough for some men, especially those who were raised with more traditional views about gender roles. But she stresses it's not about men losing power, it's about redefining what power even means.
So it's not a zero-sum game. Like, if women win, men automatically lose.
Exactly. She thinks that by embracing qualities like empathy, vulnerability, and collaboration, men can actually become more empowered, more fulfilled in their relationships and in society as a whole.
That's a really interesting take. But I know some men might resist the idea of embracing these qualities that have traditionally been seen as feminine. They might worry it'll make them look weak.
Riker tackles that head on. She says true strength is about being both assertive and compassionate, a leader and a supporter. It's about shedding those old, limiting ideas about what a man should be.
I think that message will resonate with a lot of guys who are looking for a more balanced way of being. It's about breaking free from those old stereotypes.
And it all ties back into her vision of a future where men and women can work together as equals to create a more just, compassionate, and sustainable world. It's an inspiring vision, I think.
It is. So we've talked a lot about these abstract ideas, but what about concrete examples? Does she talk about women in leadership roles?
Definitely. She highlights women who have smashed glass ceilings and succeeded in male-dominated fields. But she also talks about the unique challenges women face in those positions, like that double standard of needing to be both assertive and nurturing, something men rarely have to deal with.
It's true, there's a different set of expectations for women, and that can create a lot of pressure, even resentment.
Riker gets that. She wants women to challenge those double standards, support each other in breaking down those barriers. And she talks about mentorship and networking, creating a more supportive environment for women in those spaces.
It's about women building each other up, not just trying to fit into a system that wasn't built for them.
Exactly. And it's about men being allies, recognizing the biases women face, and working to create a fairer system.
That's a crucial message for men to hear. It's not about stepping aside. It's about being actively involved, working together for change.
Absolutely. Riker's book is a great roadmap for anyone committed to that journey. It's a call to action for all of us, men and women, who believe in a more equitable and fulfilling future.
Well said. I think we've covered a lot of ground in this second part of our deep dive into Connie Riker's Dominant Women. We talked about eco-feminism, male disposability, sexual liberation, and the role of men in a female-led society. It's a lot to process.
It is. And I'm excited to wrap things up in the next part, where we'll look at what Riker predicts for the future of female supremacy and explore what this shift might actually mean for all of us.
Okay, so we've gone through a lot of Connie Riker's arguments in Dominant Women, historical power imbalances, changes in the workplace, religion's role, even ecofeminism, and how men might feel in a world led by women. But where does this all lead? What does she actually think a society built on female supremacy looks like?
That's the big question, right? And Riker doesn't hold back on giving us her vision of the future. She sees a world where the traditional power structures are completely flipped, women leading in almost every area of life. But it's not just about women taking over men's jobs or anything like that. It's a deeper change in values.
So what kind of values are we talking about? Get specific.
She argues that if female supremacist society would prioritize things like cooperation over competition, nurturing over dominance, empathy over aggression, basically all those qualities that have been labeled feminine or even seen as weaknesses, they become the foundation of this new world.
Knowing our listeners and their red pill perspective, I bet some are already raising eyebrows. This might sound like a recipe for disaster, a society that can't function, like it goes against human nature.
She addresses that, of course. Riker argues that what we think of as natural is actually just a made-up hierarchy designed to keep men in power. She wants us to question everything we've been taught and consider that a society built on different values could be more just, more sustainable, better for everyone.
It's a radical idea, no question. But how would this shift in values actually play out in the real world? What would it mean for our everyday lives, our relationships?
Imagine a world where most leaders are women. Not because of quotas or anything like that, but because their leadership style is seen as the most effective. A style based on collaboration, emotional intelligence, thinking about the long term.
So it's not about excluding men, it's about valuing different leadership qualities, ones that we've often associated with women.
Exactly. And Riker thinks this would change everything. Imagine workplaces where people help each other instead of constantly competing, where supporting your colleagues is just as important as individual success. Or think about parenting. Fathers would be encouraged to be just as involved as mothers without any stigma.
It's a nice idea, I'll give her that. But how realistic is it? This is a massive change to our social structures, to our most basic beliefs. Can we really pull that off?
Riker argues that change is always possible, and it often happens faster than we expect. She uses examples like the fight for women's right to vote or the civil rights movement, huge shifts that seemed impossible but happened because people fought for them and changed minds.
So she's saying that if enough people believe in these new values and push back against the old way of thinking, change can happen.
That's her point. And it's not just about big revolutions. It's about the small choices we make every day. how we live out these values in our own lives, with our families and communities.
That's a more empowering message. We're not just waiting for someone else to fix things. We can each do our part.
Right. But she's realistic. She knows this won't be easy. There will be resistance, pushback. Anytime you challenge power, things get messy.
But she still believes in this future, where female supremacy creates a more just and balanced world.
Absolutely. Her book is a call to action, to imagine a better future and work towards it, one that's not limited by the old patriarchal rules.
That's a strong message to end on. We've explored a lot in this deep dive into Connie Riker's Dominant Women. It's a book that makes you think, question things, and leaves you with a lot to ponder.
I agree. It challenges a lot of assumptions. I hope our listeners will keep thinking about these ideas about the changes happening with gender dynamics and consider what a future with different values could look like. Maybe it's not so crazy after all.
And that's a wrap on this episode of The Deep Dive. Thanks for joining us, and keep those conversations going. The future is up to us to create.